You should be live now.
My office?
Yep, you're live right now, 100%.
Where is everybody?
They have to
They're
start
gonna be
joining.
joining in as usual.
Feedback. Hold on.
Can you tell Dr. go to Dr. Lewis and have her click on the new link?
Okay, perfect. Should have feedback right now.
So when they all pop on.
Yep, as they all click the link, they should all start appearing.
Thanks.
There you go.
Hey, Jean.
Okay.
It's gonna be easy if we have the meeting ID and password
Yeah, we're live right now.
for most of it. Oh. Get me the meeting ID and password.
I'll get it. It's right here. Can you read it from here? Here it is. If you come to the TV, you can read it here, fellas. And I have no password on it. I have no password on it. It's right up there. See the meeting ID?
Yeah, type it down, don't say it out loud or people will say.
Yep. Don't say it out loud.
Okay.
Yeah, just write it down. I can't see it.
Yeah, I'm gonna do it.
Come to the TV, you can read it here, fellas. And it's our new normal. And I have no password on it. It's right up. See the meeting ID?
Yeah, type it down, don't say
Thank
it
you.
out loud.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Everyone good?
It's now being streamed.
We got to email it out. Just write it down. I can't see it.
Yeah, I'm gonna do
It's our new normal.
Okay, I'm just announcing to the public, we're having a few
Thank you.
technical
Thank you, Jen.
difficulties, and as soon as everybody's on, we will begin the meeting. Okay, we're
All right.
What is the meeting ID? Okay, we're all here. Good evening and thank you for joining us tonight. Can you please stand and recite the Pledge of Allegiance with us? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'd ask that you join us for a moment of silence in memory of those who have been lost to COVID-19, with our sympathy to their families and friends. Thank you. We also want to wish those who have tested positive for the coronavirus a full and speedy recovery. And finally, we want to thank our first responders, our healthcare professionals, and all essential workers for all that they are doing. Thank you. Board announcements. Seth? You're on silent.
I think I'm off now.
Yes.
Okay. Good evening. And for those tuning in online, welcome you as well. First and foremost, I want to echo what Debbie said. I want to also wish those who have tested positive with the coronavirus and those who are experiencing symptoms of full and a speedy recovery. I also want to thank our first responders, our healthcare professionals, and all essential workers for all that you do. Times like these make us appreciate even more what you do. Perspective and gratitude should be our watchwords during these times. Times like these put perspective on our lives and our priorities, and let us show some gratitude for what we have. I think we can all appreciate our family and our friends and our health a little bit more these days. Second, I think I speak for all of us on the board when I extend appreciation and heartfelt thanks to Dr. Lewis, Central Administration, all of our administrators, our teachers, and staff. They have spent endless hours over the last several weeks. They have done so as they also deal with the angst of this pandemic and their own family and personal obligations. Their diligence, self-motivation, and dedication to our district and its students are a source of inspiration. So thank you. Third, I understand there has been some anxiety and confusion leading up to today's implementation of the alternative learning plan. We recognize that online instruction is not a substitute for in-classroom learning. The district goal is to make sure there's enough coursework, online instruction, and contact time with teachers to last most of the school day, recognizing normal breaks for lunch and other activities. We recognize that this was not the case today for all of our students. But as Dr. O'Mara described in her video yesterday, going forward, the board has requested and the district will modify the delivery of online instruction in hopes of replicating as best as possible daily instruction received during a normal school day for students. That does not mean that students should be in front of their computer screen 6+ hours a day. It does mean continuing to make sure students have access to the same educational materials, new instructional content, and the same teacher contact time that they would get if they were physically in school to the best possible. Please remember that there is a chain of command. If you or your child has a question, your first communication should always be to your teacher. As I'm sure you've learned throughout this entire ordeal, our teachers have been communicating with you day and night, and even over the weekend. And if your teacher can't help, your principal, your assistant principal, or your chair can. Your educators are the source for answers to your questions. Use them. Of course, we welcome constructive feedback with an emphasis on constructive to help improve our online learning program. We all have to be a little bit more flexible, a little bit more patient. All of us, the district, our educators, our students, and our parents. But we'll get there together sooner rather than later. Fourth, as you know, last Friday, the district had to close all of our fields, tracks, tennis and basketball courts. It is unfortunate that it even had to get to this point. Many in our community have been practicing safe social distancing, but some have not. This includes students and adults. For you students who have been congregating at our fields and partying with your friends, I say to you that this is not a game. The last numbers I saw was that more than 100 POB residents alone have tested positive. People are getting sick and people are dying. If you want to be treated as adults, if you want to earn respect and trust and be given greater responsibilities, then you need to act more responsible. For our adults who also aren't treating this with the seriousness it deserves, shame on you. You all know better, or at least you should. It isn't the district's job to parent your child. That's your job. I'm not in the business of telling any parent how to actually parent, but when you ignore the warnings from our healthcare professionals and our experts, and when your actions or inactions endanger the health of all of our children and our community as a whole, well, that's something that we just can't let go unaddressed. If your kids aren't doing the right thing, it's your job to fix it. And for goodness sake, please model the way for your child and act responsibly too. For those parents, adults, and children who are doing the right thing, I say thank you, thank you, thank you. On modeling the way, we are all anxious. We are all frustrated. We are all tired, and we're all a little bit more on edge and emotional than usual. But as Dr. Lewis has time and again described, our children are watching and they are listening. It is more important now than ever to communicate respectfully from across the street, over the phone, on video chat, and even on social media. A crisis and an emergency often bring out the best and the worst in people. Let's make sure that when we look back at this time, people will remember that we acted our best and we spoke to and about each other in only positive ways, not negative ones. Finally, despite those few negative Nancys and pissy Peters out there, our community, you've really risen to the occasion. and I'm proud of us. As the superintendent highlight demonstrates, and as many social media posts and news stories show, we are a community of helpers. We support each other, we support our neighbors, we support those in need, those less fortunate, and those most vulnerable. I want to thank all of those individuals and those businesses who are so giving of themselves during this tough time. We are all in this together. I remain confident in the board's view, as described in our letter nearly 2 weeks ago, that POB will emerge from this crisis more resilient, more cohesive, and stronger than ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Exactly how I feel. I appreciate you saying it so articulately. Ginger?
Thanks, Seth. Also, a big part of our board this year is that we talked about social emotional learning. This is certainly the greatest lesson that any of our students can have. And also our parents. There are a lot of people out there who have a lot of pride, but don't have enough money for food, and they're worried about where their next meal is coming from. There are people in the community that want to help. I know we just worry about senior citizens, but we have families with young children who don't have enough money to put food on their plates. So if anybody knows anybody and you can't help out, if you could let central administration know, and I will get it to the people who have called me, and there'll be total privacy. But we've got to think of all of our neighbors, because some people are just hurting, and we're worried about education. But emotionally, this is taking a toll on our children's lives every day, because they're hearing about it. They're hearing about elderly people. They have grandparents. They're worried about their grandparents. They're worried if their parents are in any way involved with medical help for other people. So let's try to, as much as we can, keep it positive for the kids and find some fun things for them to do. They can bake cookies and stuff that they can help get to other people's homes, but let's just try to make our kids feel that this isn't the end of the world. Thanks.
Thank you, Ginger. Any other board announcements? Okay, superintendent announcements.
Thank you so much to the community. I want to thank you for your patience as we're working through a very difficult time, to bridge learning, to continue the work of the district, to continue all the functions of the district in a safe way for all. We have a learning plan that we had posted. We've taken a lot of feedback from you, from our teachers, and we know that what we will eventually put out there will be something that will better serve our students. And we ask you again for your patience, as Dr. O'Mara and her team, who I have to say have worked so hard to address the instructional component for you. And I know that it isn't the experience that you have on a daily basis at POB, but this is a new normal, and we're trying to adjust to it. And especially since we know that this may even extend towards the end of the month. So while we started planning for days, we're now looking at months of planning. You will see today that many of every child should have been spoken to by a teacher, should have connected. Our principals are having principal chats. We are having instructional programs, whether it's face-to-face, whether it's Google Meets, or some people are using Zoom, some people are using all different apps. These are all apps that have been approved by the district. And we ask you to just be patient as we try to do the best, to put best practice forward and to engage our students in a most constructive way. Since we are in this new normal, we've had to make some decisions that I'd like to share with you. For example, we have canceled all field trips and extra classroom, any classroom activities through May 30th, so we can continue to plan constructively. So all field trips, all arts and education programs have been canceled through May 30th. As it's very clear to me that although the governor has closed us for April 15th, that I consider planning for another 15 days at least. And that, so when we come back, I've kept June still on the calendar because I really am hoping that we will come back and have those celebrations that are so meaningful in June. But as May goes forward, we will continue to plan. For those parents who are using private schools, today the governor gave permission for a postponement of the April 1st deadline for sending in your transportation requests. So please know that that has been extended to April 15th and that we will certainly accommodate those. Many of our functions are not in 100% capacity. We're also mindful of the social distancing. And so when you want to contact us, I would ask that you first use email, because we are all working around the clock on email. But I also ask, as Mr. Greenberg has said, to be respectful in your email. There's no one here who doesn't want to meet your needs. We, especially in central office, we have worked 7 days a week, throughout the day. And we'll try to continue to do that. There have been many questions who have come in, some respectfully, some not so much, about the instructional plan. And I would say, I'm going to put them all in one, that we understand that there is some displeasure with what we have put out as an instructional plan through Tuesday. But trust me when I say that what we will put out on Wednesday will reflect the input of so many of our teachers, our parents. Now that we know that it's not a couple of days that we're going to be closed, we are planning instruction through the end of April. So whatever we put out will meet our needs through the end of April. So again, we also heard today that NISMA, all our NISMA competitions have been canceled. We will put that out in a formal e-blast to all students. But do know that as you watch your teachers, there are many, many celebrations around the district. I want you to continue to send me those wonderful things that are happening where people are being kind and reaching out to one another and supporting each other, and the many ways that teachers are touching you. Send me those stories, because I will try to keep those highlights going every Friday. I think it's an important bridge to our normalcy. So please continue to send me these wonderful stories. We are POB, and we are going to get through this together. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go on to reports and discussions. The first is special election. I'd like to suggest to the board that we approve a resolution this evening to cancel the special election that was to be held Monday, April 6th. In the current environment, it would be irresponsible to ask people to come out and vote, and impossible to respect social distancing. So our May election, which the state has now moved to at least June 1st at the earliest, would then have 3 seats to be voted on, 2 for a 3-year term and 1 for a 1-year term, plus our budget and capital reserve. So is there any discussion on that? Anybody want to say anything, or will we just approve the resolution under new business? Okay, seeing nobody has anything to add to that, we'll go on to childcare arrangements. Dr. Lewis?
Thank you. As Mr. Greenberg recognized, many of our first responders and medical personnel who live in our district are giving a tremendous service to all of us. And they also have children who need to be taken care of. So all of superintendents in Nassau actually work together to create a system where 10 school districts who were operating a scope childcare program are going to be receiving our students. Our closest one is Syosset. And we entered into an agreement which the board will formalize tonight, so that children of first responders and childcare workers, and I think the governor extended that to grocery workers, so people at ShopRite, their children who live in the district will be able to also attend Syosset free of charge. This is something that all districts are going to be participating in. And by everyone participating, we are able to give the first responders our first thank you by first taking care of their children.
Thank you. We're going to go on to use of facilities, Dr. Lewis.
Last week, we had a lot of families emailing us about the social distancing violations that were happening on many of our playgrounds and fields and tracks. And we had already said that our internal facilities were closed, but our external playgrounds and facilities were open. And it just was not safe. It's not safe for the public. We want to really contain the spread of COVID-19. And so I used the policy that was in existence, which gave the superintendent the authority to close the fields, but also the board can also do the same. But I was able to exercise that, knowing that the board would be meeting on Monday, and the weekend was right in front of us. So all facilities are now closed. So that means our baseball fields, our track, every tennis courts, they're all closed. I would have loved to have kept them open, but it just was not being used in a wise way. And so we had to do that.
Thank you. Next, we're going to go on to Parent and Student Alternative Option Learning Plan 2020. Mary?
I'm going to ask Dr. Mara, our new superintendent, as
Oh.
of August.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Greenberg and Dr. Lewis. And my apologies to the community. We really tried to put a plan together for the short term, and it clearly isn't going to hold muster for a longer closure. I want to assure you, starting yesterday when we were looking at the longer closure, the chair people, directors, all the principals worked all day and night and this morning to come up with a plan that really reflects the feedback we received. And I have to tell you, most of you felt that your feedback was going to be taken as an attack. It was not received that way. The beautiful thing about getting 100 emails in, an hour is that you can easily see a theme. So I hope when the new plan is published tomorrow, that will go into effect on Wednesday, you will see two major themes addressed. One, the day will mirror more what the students were used to. And at the high school level in particularly, the students won't have to figure out when to meet their teachers. They will meet their teachers at their normal times. So they will be able to meet every one of their teachers every day, unless it's an every other day class. And at the elementary level, we understand that the parents do not know the math as well as the math teachers. So we've separated those blocks so that parents have time to sit and work with the students and the teacher, and then have time to digest some of the material that's been put out. We know it's overwhelming. Most colleges have trouble with their students who try to do online courses. We're doing the best we can. We did take a lot of feedback from students who felt last week before the recess, the amount of work that was loaded on their Google Classrooms was extensive and overwhelming. So that's what we were trying to attempt to do by having it come out in a paced manner. But clearly, most of you have communicated to us today that wasn't enough work to feed the student throughout the day. So we have adjusted that. We do hear that you want more face time with your teachers. We are working on that as well. This is not something all of our teachers have facility with, that level of technology nor comfort. We are providing our teachers with regular webinars on how to use certain tools. And thank you for those who've recommended tools that you're using now that you're working at home. But again, this new plan will be published tomorrow afternoon, and students will have a very easy time knowing what they need to do the next day because it will mirror their current schedule at the secondary level, grades 5 to 12. We cannot replicate the school day for the elementary students. To Mr. Greenberg's point, they cannot. An 8-year-old sit in front of the computer from 9 o'clock until 3:35 with a break for lunch and recess. So we've come up with a plan that I think will be more palatable to the parents, but also meaningful and enough work that will assure you. The guidance department will publish tomorrow a list of the other concerns that came about state assessments, SATs, APs. we are aware that the entire world is dealing with adjusted curriculum and pacing of curricula. We are aware of that. We will assure you that your students will not fall behind, that the AP has made it very clear as to what needs to be covered for their new exams, and our teachers will adjust accordingly. And when the Regents comes out with what they're doing about the Regents exams, we will add to that blast that the guidance department will send out, because those are the other concerns we're hearing from parents at the secondary level. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and tomorrow a new plan will be blasted out via email. And again, as Mr. Greenberg says, if you are unsure, your child's teacher is your first point of contact because they know their schedule. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go on to suspension of grading policy.
So
Dr. Lewis?
for those who are asking in the Ask the Superintendent about grading, this should address it. We are asking the board tonight to suspend the grading policy as it's written, because we recognize that the time of closure has transformed learning, and we want to be sure that no student is hurt by what occurs during this period. So we're going to do an analysis of the work that's been done in the 26 days that of quarter three. We recognize that the quarter would have ended this week, but we need to do some more analysis and come back to the board, hopefully by next meeting, with a comprehensive plan as to what we want to do about the grading. But I want to assure everyone who's listening and everyone who's sent in a question with regard to grading, there is no child that will be hurt or whose grade will be adversely affected by the closure. So currently, every grade every paper or any work that is being done during this time is only given a pass-fail. There are many students, and many of the honor students have emailed me, we were doing so well in quarter three, we don't want to lose those grades. And we don't want to lose that effort. So we are going to do a complete analysis of the 26 days and come up, and we hope, if the board allows us to suspend the grading policy, that we would come up with something that will be effective for all students and will work for all students. In addition, I was just on with the commissioner today, and the Board of Regents has to make a decision about the Regents exam. AP has already made a decision about the AP exams and has said that the AP exam will only test up through March 27th, I believe, so that all of the learning has occurred that they will be tested on. I tried to encourage the commissioner to do the same thing for the Regents. I don't know if I got anywhere with it, but the bottom line is I truly believe at this time that we need to come up with something that will not have the Regents having the impact that it currently has. Right now, the Regents counts as 11% of this final grade. And with everything being in flux, I would like to be able to come back with some kind of analysis that the board can authorize an emergency policy just for this year.
Okay, thank you. So under new business, we'll vote to suspend the grading policy. I'd like to suggest that we authorize the superintendent to submit to the board a plan to temporarily, for the 2019-20 school year, replace our current grading policy. Does that work for everybody? Could you just raise your hand if it works? Great, thank you. You're authorized, Dr. Lewis. Okay, then we're going to go on to budget presentations.
Okay, tonight we are supposed to go over central services, employee benefits, debt service and interfund transfers, revenue budget, class size and tallies. And certainly since we put this draft budget together, the superintendent's proposed budget together, really in January and February, a lot has changed that we could not have possibly predicted. Going back to that time, we already saw that interest rates were declining slightly, but we would not have expected to see the market change like this. We had heard murmurs of COVID-19, but I don't think anybody was able to grasp the magnitude of the pandemic or couple that with other things going on in our financial markets, such as the oil price crash that we have seen as Saudi Arabia floods the market in an oil war with Russia, and how that has put the stress on the corporate debt market. We will briefly touch on the revenue budget, but know that it will change. And we might discuss some ideas tonight, but certainly the revenue budget that is presented tonight is not what will be the revenue budget that we ask voters to opine on whenever the budget vote is, which we know it's going to be after June 1st. We also don't know what our budget adoption date is now that everything is moving, but we have a lot to do. We are going to have to continue to watch the development of the state budget and wonder what's going to happen to our state aid projection. And when that finally comes with the adoption of the state budget, we have to make a judgment call on how reliable that state aid figure is. Might we anticipate state aid cuts mid-year through next year? And how would we grapple with that? How long will this period last? And how do we need to plan to address learning needs when students return to our classrooms? How does the new economic climate affect contract negotiations with our teachers and administrators as we move through contract negotiations? So all of those things will need to be addressed. So I think we will have to, we all know this, we're not really close to a budget adoption, considering our new reality. So we'll go through the central services, employee benefits section. We will discuss the revenue budget as it was originally constructed, and then we'll move on to class size and tallies. Mrs. Stewart has her hand raised.
I think Debbie's on mute. Are you saying I can talk? So, Rich, for all those questions you just posed, and there was a couple of questions I had asked over the weekend as well, how do we do this without knowing? We know that we've already been told that state aid will be cut. We just don't know at what levels. We don't know, as you said, what the economy is going to look like in June and September or anything like this. We don't know if we can compare it to 2008 when the mortgage bubble burst. So I understand presenting it, but how do we make any rational decisions until we hear what Albany does, I guess later in the week, because they have to do this, they're supposed to adapt by Wednesday?
Well, as far as we know, they're trying to adopt by Wednesday. But the reality is that an on-time budget adoption is a relatively new thing in New York State history. So given the circumstances, perhaps it happens, perhaps it doesn't. For us, state aid usually accounts for 13% of the revenue stream. So certainly a state aid cut has an impact. But there are a lot of other moving parts here. As you know, the biggest revenue source that we have is the tax levy, and we will have to find times to discuss that and determine what that's going to be set upon, because we have a limited sources of income, and we can't over project. This would be the wrong time to do that. So we do look back to times like 2008. It makes me think about how long I've been putting together budgets. I came into the business office right after the dot-com bubble burst in 9/11. So there was a market downturn there. We have lots of history to look back to. It might not be the same as this, but we do know that 2 years down the road, we will be increases in pension system costs. And we have to start planning not just for this budget, but how does that carry forward? and look at those things that are predictable in our budgets. And there's a lot that is predictable. Salaries, benefits to most extent. Staff size, we have a very good idea of what our enrollment is going to be, give or take. But we have a very good idea of those predictable things. And we also have to have conversations about visioning. What do we expect to look like, not only next year, but what are those services that we want to provide and we expect to provide to our community in 21, 22, and 22 and 23, and plan our budget that way. So it's going to take a lot of work, and we have to work together to set some targets. And with that, I'll start moving through the presentations, then we'll get back to questions. It's going to take me a second to bring up the screen share. Okay. I did not run through the superintendent's proposed budget. Certainly I could do that. Dr. Lewis, I will call on you if you want me to run through that at this time. Or dive right back into the central services and benefits. I'm not sure she can hear me from her location.
I can. Why don't we do this?
Okay.
And then.
All right. So central services and employee benefits. These are the pieces of the budget that don't necessarily fit with other things. We've been through all of our instructional plans and programs, facilities, health, safety, transportation. And then there are these other sections of the budgets, which are very important, but kind of fall in between a lot of other pages. Central services covers things such are services that are shared among all of the buildings, and also fixed costs or costs that are actually levied on the school district. One thing we did this year is, central printing services is for things like printing of calendars, our newsletters that go home, and our budget newsletter. You can see we're holding that fairly constant. The 18-19 actual had to do with an additional mailing, but we do believe that having the budget set at $36,000 is appropriate. One change that we saw in 1920 is that we had to have all of our voting documents and the mailings home translated into Spanish. That expanded the number of pages in our documents. You will see in 1675-80 an appropriation for $25,000. That is for copy paper. We opened a print center, which was actually launching right at the beginning of March. And we are moving much of our paper there. Our processes there. For example, our graduation programs, we can print there at high quality, along with a lot of the other things that we do that are shared among the buildings with, for example, our reading and writing workshop copies that we've been supplying to our elementary teachers. We can now do that in a centralized location and distribute as needed. 1680-400 is a new initiative, electronic records management. We were actually going to start with permanent records such as our human resources and pupil personnel records, and start transitioning from paper records that date back to the 50s and earlier, and preserve them and put them in electronic media that's easier for us to retrieve. 1680,497, BOCES data processing. That is a collection of many services, either provided directly by BOCES, such as our data warehousing and grade reporting to Albany, along with other things that we subscribe to through BOCES. So it's a bit of a pass-through there for services such as board docs, bold election systems, our student management system, Infinite Campus, which we're relying on more and more. You'll see that there is an increase in that budget line. That is mostly due to the inclusion of an appropriation of about $9,500 for a demographic and enrollment survey that we do every 2 years, and also for an appropriation of thought exchange that we have been using to collect information and thoughts to get the sentiment of the community on critical topics. Going down a bit further into unallocated insurance, 1910,435. That's really our general liability and property insurance. We are expecting a bit of a rate increase there, and that's an industry rate increase. So the line is going from 648,300 to 673,300. When I say that's an industry increase, oftentimes, if, for example, Western New York has a bad winter and there are property damage there, it will affect rates here on Long Island. Vice versa, when we had Sandy and Irene here, and also that did affect part of the Catskill region also in the Adirondacks, that affected rate insurance there. So that is an industry increase we're seeing there. Student accident coverage. This is something that's rather new in the budget, in the sense that you see the increase going from 36,000 to 42,000. And what that is right now, if a parent elects to use our voluntary student accident insurance, if someone's hurt on school grounds, there is a $100 deductible and certain limits on the policy. And we are very aware that more and more families are carrying high deductible insurance. So I'm proposing that we get a policy that covers from $1 for what the family's insurance company does not cover. So for example, sometimes costs are outrageous. We've had parents who have an ambulance that unfortunately needs to take a student from Matlin to Plainview Hospital. Depending on the ambulance company, sometimes that cost and that short 2-mile drive can be over $1,000. It could be thousands of dollars. And it hits insurance hard. With the high deductibles, the present policy does not cover all that. A new policy would cover all those things for our families. And with that, that covers central services, if there are any questions there or comments.
Okay, I can't see if anybody raised their hand, so can anybody else see it?
Rich, I just have one quick question regarding the coverage.
Yep.
That would cover all families. I'm just thinking of parents that might be out of work or maybe coming out of work and need help with that service.
It's for if there's a child in the school district, the student accident insurance policy is there for them.
Okay.
All right. The general rule is the family's insurance is first, and then the student accident policy coverage is second. Of course, the policy works differently when somebody is uninsured.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
Rich, I have a question.
Mm-hmm. You put yourself back on mute, Mrs.
Sorry. On the BOCES data processing line, where we're going up about $46,000. Do you think that BOCES might reconsider some of their pricing in light of what's happening?
So as I said, there was, part of this is for services direct through BOCES. BOCES will invoice us, but then there is an end of year reconciliation where they will correct for actual cost. So if they had, for example, overcharged us on estimated labor, that's recalculated for the actual cost, and we get a reimbursement check after the end of the fiscal year. For the other things, such as for Infinite Campus, board docs, bold election systems, and things that are paid actually through BOCES to a vendor, BOCES will try and renegotiate those prices, but the prices are actually coming from the vendor, not from BOCES. So they negotiate on our behalf. I can't tell you if they will be successful on those prices or not.
Okay, thank you. But if they are, they would send a refund.
Yep. Moving on to employee benefits. So this is at the very end of the budget. It is a rather large portion of the budget. Going to the first line, this 9010 810 is the employee benefits line for the New York State employee retirement system that covers employees such as our buildings and grounds and clerical staff, non-teaching, non-administrative staff. You can see we're projecting a decrease going into 2021 from the current year adopted. That's because the employee retirement system rates are actually going down. That is done on an average. Their average is different than the teacher retirement system, the span of years they're using. So we are projecting a downturn there. We actually get that number directly from the ERS system based on our estimated payroll. Usually we pretty much hit the mark for what we actually budget. The next line down, 90/20/811, is the teacher retirement system. Unlike the employee retirement system, the teacher retirement system is projecting a rate increase going into 2021, going from 8.86% of payroll to 9.53% of payroll. We then had to calculate in what might an estimated contract settlement be in 2021. Given the current market climate, we expect that number, along with the employee retirement system, to climb in 21-22. So that's a number to keep an eye on. That is very much market driven, but whatever is happening in this year's market will not get into that average until the 2021 fiscal year. The next line down, Social Security, is a simple multiplier of 7.65% of payroll up to the FICA cap. Of course, Medicare continues on that for all salaries. So that is a simple multiplier of projected payroll. Workers' compensation, line 90/48/14. We have been working hard in stabilizing our workers' compensation insurance. You can see we're projecting a slight decrease going from 1920 to 2021. Certainly there was an increase coming from 1718 to 1819. Part of that was claims experience, people getting hurt on the job, but also the amount to employees on workers' compensation increased. So that naturally led to an increase in how much we were charged for the workers' compensation experience claims. We are happy to see that all the work we've done around the district to make things safer, not only security-wise, but reducing slip and fall hazards and improving safety conditions overall have improved our employee benefits, our workers' compensation claims experience. Line 90/50/815 is a line that we will have to talk about. That is for unemployment insurance. We have been averaging over the past several years, roughly a $35,000 to $38,000 charge depending on the year for unemployment insurance. For the last 2 years, we budgeted, including going into 2021, $45,000 for unemployment insurance. We most likely have to consider that. Looking at the past history going back to into the 1980s, it seems like the year after we have a steep market decline, unemployment insurance claims double. So we might think to, when we finally get to modifications in the budget, double that appropriation in 2020, $95,000, $90,000, so we don't find ourselves short. The rest of the budget have no change, and we generally spend what we budget for those. So with that, are there any questions? Okay.
Remove the, when you ask for questions, could you remove the sharing so that we could see the board?
Oh, okay, sure. Should I do that now?
If there are questions? I guess not. Go ahead.
Yeah, Rich, I'm sorry, it's Seth. The only question I have, I know that the TRS operates on a 5-year average. We're not going to see the impact this upcoming year. The impact this upcoming year will be to aid. Last year or 2 years ago, it was approved, and last year there was a TRS reserve that was started. I think it's important just to point out that we're limited in the amount of reserve we're allowed to put in to that. Is that right?
Yes, it is. So this fiscal year, really at the end of the last fiscal year, was the first time the board could approve this TRS reserve. It's actually a sub-reserve of the ERS reserve. And we were only allowed to put in a small percentage of the total liability that we had experienced during the last fiscal year. So the way that that is set up is they're having school districts slowly build up that reserve. Certainly as we get into 21, 22, we will have had 2 bites of that to try and fund that reserve and try and use that to balance any TRS growth on the revenue side on that reserve.
So to the extent, I mean, look, I'm happy. I know that one of the many positive things about being part of the New York State School Boards Association is that they advocate and lobby, and we've been pushing for a while now to get that reserve established, and was happy to see that it was done. So we have 1 more year to the extent we can put some in. Obviously, it helps offset, although it's not a solve-all. To the extent the stock market doesn't bounce back quick enough, for example, it's something that we have to explore about tapping into, not for next year, but the year after. Is that what you're telling us?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Okay. Trying to advance the screen on my end. Stand by. Come on. There we go. So this, the debt service slide is a bit of a misnomer, because you would expect to find our capital projects debt on this slide. But the way we do it is actually in the interfund transfer slide, so I'll get to that next. The only thing you see on this page is an appropriation for $70,000 in TAN interest. That's tax anticipation note interest. And the district has not issued tax anticipation notes in some time, but on tonight's board meeting in new business, you'll see that there's a resolution authorizing the board president to sign tax anticipation note borrowing documents. The reason why we placed that on is there is talk of a delay of tax payments to school districts, and tax anticipation notes go out if we end up in a cash crunch in order to cover expenses. So this is not something we've used in some time, but I just thought it was pertinent to point out, considering the circumstances, that this might be something the district uses this year, and that's why we keep a piece of it in the budget every year. Any questions on that?
Yes, I do. So how does this work as far as interest rate on something like a TAN, on the TANs?
So it's usually tied to the prime rate. However, if we look at the crazy month of March, there were districts that went out for a TAN in the first week of March and paid 0.7%. And you have that money for a year. You pay it back a calendar year afterwards. However, a Rye went out for a TAN 2 weeks ago and paid over 2%. That was the height of the interest rate pressure. Mortgage rates were going up. They have subsequently come down. So unfortunately, Rye went out to the market at the wrong time, because if they went out this week, they'd be paying a much lower rate. So it's completely market driven, and when you hit the market, usually close, you know, it follows close to the prime lending rate, but not always. You know, you need bidders on that money to get a low rate. Rye only had one bidder, so they ended up paying a pretty steep interest rate for short-term borrowing. Okay, moving on to interfund transfers. So in this section of the budget, here, money from the expenditure budget, voter-approved expenditure budget, is transferred into other funds within our school district operation. So the first one, school lunch, that is actually used to carry negative balances as we try to recover them during the summer. School districts can no longer fund the school lunch program with general fund appropriation, so it is self-sustaining. However, we are responsible. We can't write school lunch negative balances off in the C fund. So accounting-wise, they come back to the general fund, and then we continue to go after them, which explains why we continue to send out phone calls, letters, and emails to collect lunch debt. Interfund transfer to special aid, that has to do with their summer special education programs. We have seen some costs with that. Going back to 17-18, you can see that we spent almost $200,000, which was pretty much what we've been doing historically. 18-19, we had some special needs, so that expenditure went way up. We are projecting going into 2021, based on some language in the governor's original proposal, that the school districts would take on a greater share of the expense of summer special education programs. So we suggest an appropriation of $250,000 there. Going into the next two budget lines, one is for principal and one is for debt service interest. And we are kind of in the last year of something I've been calling our debt service hump. Going into 21-22, we'll see some relief in this area, because old debt from kind of the 2000 to 2003 era is going to be paid off. So we'll start seeing this decline. The last line, interfund transfer, that's for capital. In the past, we had been transferring a good deal of money into our capital fund. We scaled that back going into the 2021 budget, as in our first budget meeting, going all the way back to February, we went over that portion of interfund transfer to capital. With that, are there any questions? And I'll close the share. Okay, I'm going to move to pull up another presentation. So that will take me a few seconds. All right, that's inconvenient. Okay. So given the circumstances, this is a rather difficult topic to go through. Simply put, when we put the superintendent's proposed budget together, we worked on this revenue budget, proposed revenue budget, in January going into February. And certainly a lot has changed since then. So even looking at the top, and I'll see if I can use my cursor, going up to the top, state aid, with the governor's budget proposal, They were projecting an increase in foundation aid and other aids of $500,000. And then we calculated a building aid increase of a little over $110,000, $112,000. Well, the building aid portion of our state aid should not change because that's driven by the expenses of our construction projects. We are expecting a change in the foundation aid and other. To the extent we do not know yet. There has been no indication from Albany on that, so we really can't project. But we do expect the state aid number to go down. Going down to the next part of the budget, total other revenue, you can see we were already projecting a decrease in that area of the budget of over $900,000. We expected interest rates to decrease. We have the sale of Fern Place going through, and while you don't see that in the budget, if and when that sale goes through, the proceeds of that sale go into a mandatory reserve for tax reduction. And that's something that gets used for future budgets. We couldn't include it in this budget because the sale has not closed yet. So we are expecting a decrease in income from rental properties, payments in lieu of taxes. We did have a pilot payment to the district expire, all right? So that goes down. Theoretically, we should see those taxes then be paid by the property owner, and that provides relief for other property owners in the district. So we'll see how that plays out. Going down to appropriated fund balance, we did increase the appropriated fund balance over $115,000 going into 2021. We had balanced the budgeted expense for unemployment insurance from the unemployment reserve. If we change that, certainly we will draw upon that reserve more, so that is not a tax impact. With the appropriation from ERS, we can't appropriate more than the estimated expense. So if you go back in our presentations, you'll see that on the expense side, we're projecting an ERS expense of $2.5 million. We balance that off with the use of the reserve. Appropriation from employee benefit accrued liability. We make an estimate of post-employment benefits that we need to pay. And we estimated this based on past history. So we can't, once again, we have to base that use of the reserve based on an estimated calculation. So you can see our use of reserves decreased by a quarter of $1,000,000, which explains why our tax levy is increasing so much. Other than originally the state aid, the two other sections of our budget, revenue budget, were decreasing. And the only other revenue source the school district has other than state aid is tax levy. Certainly that will be revisited. That explains the why the tax levy was going up in such a way, because other revenues and use of reserves was decreasing. Questions?
Susan?
So I guess I'm gonna rephrase some of the questions I had from earlier. Not knowing what New York State is, not knowing what the tax rate's gonna come in when, because we still, if I understand still, we still don't know the tax rate, how Country Point is affecting the tax rate per individual homeowner, because they haven't decided that yet, correct?
No, we haven't gotten the tentative assessed value for the district, so we can't project that out yet. But we do know that the Country Point properties are coming online, because we can see that we're getting seeing at least a 1.1% increase in new properties that are the tax rolls in Plainview, Old Bethpage, and that really is the Country Point properties. How that filters to individual homeowners, doing simple math, if everything stayed the same, if you had a 1% increase in total assessed value and a 2.99% in tax levy increase, you'd see the actual tax levy increase felt by the community residents would be a 1.99.
Right, so because we would be paying
Going
less
into a
per,
reassessment period, there's so much unknown.
well, that's my concern.
Mhm.
You know, we have so many people, we just had maybe 2 pieces. Now we probably have about 5 or 6 pieces we don't know is going to happen. I don't want to be, you know, the person, the Grim Reaper here, but do we have to then go back and look at some of our programming that we've already spoken about in earlier meetings? And maybe this is a question for veteran board members and Lorna, since things have just been tossed up in the air.
Well, one of the things we don't know is how long this is going to last. Certainly, it looks very bleak right now, right? We had a tremendous decrease in the stock market. People are out of work. Schools are closed. But none of this is an exact science. And part of this also has to come down to the visioning of the board of what not only do we expect to provide to our community going into this budget year, the 2021, but what does it look like in 21-22? So certainly we have to have conversations about what are those instructional needs in the instructional programs, because that's our bread and butter. Can we go back and look at areas of the budget? Yes, but I think the right way to do that is to spend some time to set targets. So we know if we're going to budgetary reductions, we do them in places that are surgical rather than, just start going in and reducing for reduction's sake. And also think about how do we afford that going into subsequent years. One of the things we pride ourselves on is that our kindergartners get at least as good as educational experience as our graduating seniors. How do we sustain that? It works. We had 100% graduation rate at the end of this school year. How do we sustain that? And that is going to be a central question as we reframe our budget. Ms. Lee,
Other
question?
Ginger?
Thank you, Rich. The governor said within the last 2 days that he has zero money for education. And that's kind of a scary thing to hear somebody just come out. So are we on a slippery slope when we're considering how much state aid we're projecting to get?
Well, in this, and that's, one of the reasons I spent so little time showing the revenue budget is we know the state aid number is unreliable. But we don't have a basis to know how unreliable it is. And we have seen mid-year aid cuts before.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that.
Just finally got through the period of deficit reduction assessment. That took like 12 years after the market crash of 2008. So it's an area we've seen before. And I know we keep on talking about the state aid portion, but if we see a 10% reduction in state aid, that's $2.1 million, right? That's a big number. We saw a 1% reduction in tax levy. We're up at roughly $1.1 million. Okay, so, or 1.2, 1.3. And we have to think about what we're going to choose not to fund into the future, especially with tax levy, because if you recall with the tax levy formula, once you levy or don't levy a certain number, you can't go back and get it in a future year. Okay, so let's say we reduce our tax levy, our proposed tax levy by $1.2 million. Not only will it be there in 2021, but it echoes because your next year's tax levy is calculated off of the tax levy. So that $1.2 million will be missing in that future year budget.
Right, because when we had the shortfall many years ago, we didn't have a tax cap. So you were able to make it up. But have you done any forecasting for maybe the next 2 to 3 years to see where we're going to be? Because you're talking a lot might not be next year, but the following year because of our expenses. So if we were to look at keeping everything status quo, the amount of staffing we have, the programs and everything, following through with the amount of state aid we get this year, would you be able to sort of give us an idea of where we're gonna be within 2 to 3 years? Because there's
Yes,
almost like
yep,
a
I
clip
can-
that
I
I'm
can-
looking at and getting nervous about.
Yes, I can definitely do that. You know, one of the indicators I'm looking for is where Division of Budget comes in with their projected state aid. You know,
Right.
even if it's not a certain number, that gives us a bit of a crystal ball of where they think they're at. And I know we're talking here at the local school district level, the same conversation's going up in Albany, where they don't know what their revenues are going to be. There's so much going on, even in terms of sales taxes. Sales tax receipts are down, gas prices are down. Gas tax is a function of fuel price. Will it go back up? Will Saudi Arabia stop pumping oil and gas prices go back up? We don't know these things. Neither does Albany. And they're also waiting for news from the federal government. And they're trying to figure out how much money they can move to the state. So we have to take our best educated, not guess, but our most educated information and project out how we can, knowing that we're going to be in a period of adjustment in the next year, that if we find that state aid or other things happen, we'll have to rein in spending in certain areas of the budget in order to sustain instruction.
Okay, thank you. So that if we just could have maybe some kind of
Yep.
projection for the next 3 to 4 years, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I think we all share a certain sense of anxiety again on another issue here, right? Which is our budget, the uncertainty and not knowing. I think POB though is in a better position than some others because of our common sense budgeting over the years. Some have criticized the fact that we've created reserves, and reserves are for rainy days. They're for unforeseen, unexpected circumstances. And so to the extent that we would have to dip into some of the reserves to assist getting through a tough year, that's something that I think that we need to have a discussion about. Obviously we're going to have to make some tough budgetary decisions, but there's reasons why you have reserves, and you do your best planning. But if you need to deal with some of this stuff as it goes on, I think I'm not saying deplete them by any stretch of the imagination, but they exist for a reason. And to the extent that we can continue to do the common sense budgeting and we have to dip in order to at least maintain certain things, that's a conversation that we're going to continue to have.
And it certainly is a rainy day, so yeah.
Oh, it's pouring.
Susan,
Question.
your mic is off.
All right. We had already talked about some of the transfer of capital funds for some building improvements. Can you use those funds for programming if need be?
Are you talking about the capital reserve proposition?
Yeah, so in particular, like the POB middle school refurbishing of their courts, since that line that we talked about, where we were going to redo the fields and the tennis courts. That was a transfer, a capital reserve transfer.
That's in the capital reserve. That what we've been doing with the capital reserve is, as we use it, we also try to replenish it. So if that money was not used in the capital reserve, we kind of have a steady state in the capital reserve that would give you the ability to use more appropriated fund balance into the 2021 budget. So it is something we can consider.
So that would be something what you talked about, surgical precision of adjustment.
Right. On the very technical sense, we can't take the money out of the capital reserve and use it for operations, salaries, building maintenance, whatever it is, without having voters approve the liquidation of the capital reserve. All right. So, but what we would probably look at in that circumstance is not you putting money into the capital reserve for a year. Well, we use that to increase appropriated fund balance. It's certainly a revenue option we can discuss further.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions with that, I'm going to pass the meeting off to Dr. Molieri for staffing and class size. I just have,
Thank you, Rich.
which I think I already did.
Rich, you good?
I'm good.
Okay, well, thank you for passing it off to me, and good evening, everyone. So I have the pleasure and honor of doing two presentations for you tonight, the spring class size report and the tallies and numbers from for next year. So we will start with the spring class size report. Okay, can everybody see that? Excellent. All right, so our class size report takes a look at our numbers that are actual, which are from Beds Day. We always go the first Wednesday in October is when we have to report our attendance. So we use those benchmark days as our benchmarks going forward. So you'll see our 18-19 actual numbers from Beds Day here. We projected these numbers for this school year. If you recall from last year, we did not do a rollover projection on this, but we had our first year of a BOCES demographic study. So we used those numbers. And then these are our enrollment numbers from this school year on the first Wednesday of October. You'll see that we ended up close to where we were with decreases on the K-4 level, increases in the middle school level, and a slight increase at the high school level, but you'll see where the balance is, and we're right about where we were last year. In terms of class sizes by high school and sections, over here we have the number of sections. This is the number of classes that have 1 to 10 students in them, 11 to 15, and so far down to 31 plus. You'll see by building, you have 612 sections at the high school, 56 in that 1 to 10, 100, 128, 135. So you'll see the majority of our clusters run between 16 and 27, 28 is where the majority, and that falls true in both of the middle schools. Well, you'll see they are. These 31 pluses, if you're wondering, are PE and music classes, which do tend to have larger numbers simply because bands and orchestras and choruses are larger numbers. So that's where you get the over 30s. Elementary, you can see that our class sizes are fairly consistent in all of our classes. You see our overall enrollment buildings, the number of sections in each of the buildings, and the average class sizes in each of the buildings are pretty consistent across the board. And this is what it looks like as of right now. With regard to enrollment, you'll see that our enrollment sits here. Then our average class sizes and this is as of March 5th. That's why it's different than the Beds Day numbers. So you'll see we did increase a little bit. And then you see the number of teaching staff, certified staff that are associated with each one of the buildings and our total staffing down here. Again, this is as of March 5th, not as of the October Beds Day. Questions?
Susan?
Is there a way for us to see the actual or the average of the core subjects in the secondary school? You showed us that it's between 16 and 20. I forgot what the slide said. But what is the core classes? Because I'm assuming that the 31 plus are more gym class type sections.
Yeah, the 31 plus and the higher ones are your PE classes and your music classes. So that's where they're lying. But we can break that out to go to core classes, the 5 cores if you want in the buildings. We can do that and get that to you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions on this? No?
Yes.
Okay, then I will move up. Sorry, Ginger.
Yeah, just collaborative classes. How did you add the average of those class sizes?
So the numbers are not with the collaborative classes. Those are gen ed numbers.
Okay. Can we see it with the collaborative when you have a chance?
It will really skew depending on the class. Some buildings have more than others, so it'll really take a big difference for it. I can put the collaboratives together separately for you.
Okay, that's fine. Perfect. Perfect.
Okay. Okay. right, so now we'll move on to the tallies if there are no more questions. Okay, so again, this is staffing and tallies for the next school year. This is how we're looking at budgeting for staffing and any changes and tweaks in there. Similar to what we've done in the past, so it'll look familiar to most of you. So our just general overview, we are going to run, I'm going to give you the enrollment projections, K-4 overviews, middle school overview, high school, special ed, district, and then a summary. You will recognize some of the data in here because we just went through it with some of the class size data and from the fall class size. So I will go through those relatively quickly, but answer any questions that you may have. So our actual enrollment, again, as we discussed a few minutes ago, from Beds Day to Beds Day, you'll see it here. We just went through this slide, so we'll move on. And when we break it down by building on the elementary level, you'll see the 18-19 in the first column under the building, and then the 2021 anticipated going forward. So for kindergarten at Old Bethpage, we have 72 kids currently enrolled in kindergarten. We are projecting 80. This is a rollover budget where we're looking at our numbers as it goes forward. We're using here, these numbers, the projections are from the BOCES demographic study that we did last year. So that's where we're using those numbers in there. So it's only a year old, so we're using those numbers. We'll see based on the census and enrollment just how we end up. We'll notice that there is a slight decrease in the anticipated K through 4 enrollment projections for next year. Matlin and POB and JFK, we do it by grade level. You can see what the actuals are on Beds Day, what we're projecting going forward. And you'll see the plus minuses in red and black next to each one of the grade levels. And you'll see that our staffing will slide with the kids, obviously, where it can too. And you'll see the high school also with theirs is relatively flat going forward to the next year. The K-4 overview for 1920. This shows you the current enrollment, the number of sections and the average class size by grade level, and then an average for the buildings. This only takes into account the general education classes, just so you're aware, as the 497 here, and then the 51 is broken out for any of the ABA and self-contained classes at Stratford Road. So you just see that that's broken out a little bit differently, and you'll see our enrollment. This is also something that we put into our monthly enrollment reports that you see. For 2020, 2021, you can see we've inputted the BOCES enrollment data for kindergarten and then factored out the same type of rollover piece. And you can see that our average sections are fairly consistent across the board in the average for the buildings. Remember, K1 has different guidance than 3-4 with regard to overall enrollment classes and board guidelines. So for a K-4 program right now, as we look at it, it maintains all program services. It maintains current class size and adheres to guidelines. It maintains faculty and staff. At Stratford Road, there'll be an additional section. At JJP, we're predicting 2 less sections and 1 less section at Pasadena, although we do have to monitor that kindergarten enrollment to see what happens there. No change in sections from Old Bethpage. Special education, all based on annual reviews and the programs going forward, but we're monitoring the ICTs and the ABAs and the special classes to see what we need if we have to make any adjustments of where we're going. And right now, everything maintains the K2 AIS program, the reading teachers, the push-ins, all of those services would remain as it stands right now. So just another way of looking at each one of the buildings, the number of sections in this one on the first bullet point, I add the number of, you have 4 sections in grade 2 and 4, K2 and 4, and the 3 sections in grade 3. So you'll see projected going forward where we see it. Our average class size is projected at 21.4 using Old Beth as an example. currently 21.2. So we are trying to remain consistent on the class sizes. You'll see that across the board here. And you'll see where we have 4 sections, where we have 3 sections, or in the case of Pasadena and Stratford Road, where we have 5 sections and where we have 4 sections. And then where our ICT classes are. Notice Old Beth Page, ICT classes in grades K through 4. Judy Jacobs, 1 and 2. Pasadena, 1, 3, and 2, 1, 3, and 2 and 4. And then, of course, the Stratford Road program, which is consistent with what we've been doing. The middle schools, so in 1920 and in 2021, we see our number of sections that we had, the class sizes accordingly for the buildings. And then we go to where we're projecting for the 2 buildings, and you'll see where we're at. Let me just, it's interesting, I have to keep moving the video to see my screen. When you come over here, we do have you know, some interesting pieces coming in here, such as 9 sections here for POB Middle School. We've kept that there, knowing that we're going to need people going forward, and we're not sure about kindergarten enrollment and where our needs may shift K through 6. So we've left that in here at this point in time, but it may be something we want to look at down the road. So right now, POB Middle School is projected to decrease 24 students, but the staffing will stay the same. And Matlin Middle School will increase 8 students. They do have some increased needs that total of 0.7 in FTE. Please be mindful that we are working with our staff remotely to try and refine these, and we continue to do that tomorrow with the staff all day online doing staffing meetings to see exactly where we're at. The high school overview is a minus 1.4 FTE overall. They're going to decrease approximately 8 students. This is your plus and minus by section. You will notice that the high school has put in a request for an additional assistant principal. They are looking to restructure what they are doing with regard to services for kids and how we're meeting the needs of all kids. How we're meeting the needs of kids that have substance issues or concerns. They're looking at other resources that we have with Northwell Health. They're looking at the Twilight program and how we can serve that. And what they're looking to do is shift some of their FTEs around to cover that, and notice still coming in at a minus 1.4 on the FTE. I'm sure we'll get more into that as the conversation goes on. With that, there is some classified staffing changes in here that I wanted to put in because we do have a clerical librarian who retired, but we are looking to shift that FTE if there was a new assistant principal to that new assistant principal, and then plus 0.5 in the guidance area to cover the increasing demands in the guidance office. Special education. An increase of 1.8 FTEs. Accordingly, all our services are still intact. Your plus minus ratio here is really at Old Beth, where we increased the ICT classes to cover the needs over there and the needs of the district. And then we have some shifts in Matlin last year of shifting Matlin's 5th grade and stuff and making sure we have everything in there. So we have do have a 1.8 increase in special ed staffing as of now. Again, we are pending annual review outcomes and additional staffing talks. Overall, this sheet just shows you that if you do all your pluses and minuses, your pieces, because you're down a section in JJ, 2 sections in JJP, 1 section here, but you're up 1 here. You got all these pieces that are out there. It is an overall minus 1.165 in staffing for the year as it's currently looked at. But again, we are taking another look at everything. We did have a kind of an interrupted month this year when we do this. So we are working hard to refine this and get this down to where we can maintain all our services, improve them where we can, and then provide the board with a good sound fiscal staffing plan. So it means right now it means everything. I'm sorry. It maintains class size, equitable services, the levels of services within the tax cap, and it is also driven by student requests and enrollment. Questions?
Susan, can you? Yeah, Susan.
Do you want me to wait as if somebody else has a question?
No.
Ask your question.
Okay, so I'm concerned with a couple of things. I know we've had some small discussions about the drug alcohol counselor at the high school. Our mission statement says that we're making this a priority. We've talked about this for a very long time. I know we have some plans with the collaboration with Northwell Health, but I'm still concerned that that's a position we all felt so strongly on to bring on. And if it wasn't, maybe if it's not the position, but it was the person, I'm not going to get into that, obviously, in a public meeting. But the position itself, I believe, is an important position. I would also, in that same vein, like to understand what the new assistant principal or how the delegation of duties would go from the building principal to now 4 assistant principals at the high school. So if that can be provided, I don't want to just say, yes, let's put it in because we're now down 1, you know, the math works out that you're down 1 FTE. I want to make sure that it's appropriate. I just don't want to look at it as a balancing act in some numbers.
So just so I'm clear, the request would be for a written proposal as to the need and responsibilities of the new AP and how any responsibilities would shift from the current 3 AP to a 4 AP system. And then looking for.
Can I, Vince, just to clarify, and also add the building principal into it because it's a whole building administration hierarchy.
Okay. And then looking into the drug and alcohol counselor position, function structure, why change and what the change would be and how is it equivalent or better?
Right, because I mean, we brought on, I thought we were so excited as a board, and correct me if I'm wrong, bringing in the drug and alcohol counselor position to when we first approved it. And now we've only allowed it to run 1 year, correct? 1 year she was here?
2
2
years.
So I just want to know, maybe it wasn't the right person. 3 years, Chris?
I'm sorry, 3 years?
Okay, so I just want to make sure it wasn't, did we bring her in and it was just, we didn't, before we get rid of
I want to
this?
discuss the actual individual.
No, I don't,
It's
but
the
I'm sorry, Lorna, before we get rid of the position, because that's what it looks like you're eliminating, I'd like to understand, and we can talk about this, not on a public session, what the problems were.
I think it's appropriate for us to at least address it since it's in the staffing report. I want to assure you that the services that we intended to have when we proposed this position, it will be delivered. So as we look at all of our services, we're looking for more flexibility in the services, greater expertise in the services, and flexibility not only, particularly in the time of service. We found that that particular service is better served after school hours with some expertise and flexibility around a range of topics, rather than having an individual who's available during school hours from 7 to when the time that the school is open. I think this is not just for this position, but as we look down the road, we're going to need to have service providers be available off of school hours. And the greater flexibility you can have in delivering these services with agencies, I think the more potent the delivery will be. And so as we look at this, we've had 3 years of this, and we've come to the conclusion that we need the expertise that comes from those kinds of agencies in addressing some of the behaviors that we see. And there's such wide ranges that we need to be able to tap different personnel from these agencies. So that's our recommendation, not to lose the service, but to make it better in terms of the wider range of availability of the kinds of people that we would tap into when we have this service. So that's with the drug and alcohol service. So the service remains. The intent that we had for setting the position, the services remain. But the more we're more convinced that these kinds of services cannot be delivered by one person, that it really needs to be delivered by a range of people with a depth of expertise. With regard to the AP, this is something that the principal recommended, and I fully support. But again, we did it before the collapse of Wall Street, so we may not Wall Street hasn't collapsed, but before the financial time. So it's something we will consider. But let me say this: in Jim's proposal, there has been a tremendous amount placed on all of our schools with the identification of students in crisis, and higher expectation that we deliver services to them, that investigations from DASA, investigations around various events, higher expectations from our administrators, and they're delivering on it. Think about it, every Chromebook has Go Guardian, and every Chromebook 24 hours a day signals to us when children are going on sites of self-harm or any other types of harm that would come to them. And we call on our administrators to do the investigation. We have bullying behaviors, harassment behaviors. Those are the kinds of things that every school speaks about being on the rise. Our high school has 3 APs and services 4 grade levels. Now think about it. Our middle school has 4 grade levels and services half the population of the high school. So those, if you combine the two middle schools, they have the population of the high school. And they have 4 APs when we combine those, 2 APs each and a principal. When we put those same students into the high school, we have the same population and sometimes a growing population because we do take in more students in the 7th grade. But they have 3 APs. It's very easy, it's actually better to have a high school, an AP per grade level. So that if we had 4 APs, each AP would be a grade level and would move with the kids as they move, the students, as they move through the grade levels. So that's greater intensity, greater connection with students, and greater oversight of our students. That's what we have in the middle school. Our APs move with the students as we move through grade levels. So this is really looking comprehensively at how we service students better. I fully support it, but again, the board has to look at all of our requests. And in the end, when we do those modifications, you will know at that point, I hope, what the governor is saying. And but I fully support that request, knowing what the high school is dealing with and the higher demands that we have placed on the high school. And I'm simply trying to provide the support to match those demands.
Thank you, Lorna. Kara,
Hi.
your mic is off.
Yeah, thank you. So I have 2 questions. One's relatively simple. The other one's a little more complex. I noticed that we have a minus 0.4, I think, in the high school for speech. Is that because of a reduction in anticipated need in that area?
Yes.
Thank you. And the other question is kind of piggybacking off of what we were just what Dr. Lewis was just talking about. In addressing the needs, thinking proactively and also as they're actually occurring in all of these grade levels, when we are bringing the kids back from this break and going into the following school year, do we think that there's going to be additional needs that we're going to be having to take into consideration for both our special ed and general ed populations that are not included in this budget right now?
Excellent question. Excellent question. And it is the question that every superintendent is worried about and every director of pupil personnel is worried about, because compensatory services are certainly on our mind. We have youngsters, and in fact, some of the questions tonight are around IEPs. As during this time of closure, we can't come anywhere close to matching of what the services are that are on the IEPs. We are going to try as best we can, but wherever that gap is, we have to think about compensatory services. And when we crafted this budget, we finished this budget in February. We handed this budget to you in fair times, in wonderful times. The market was at the highest it's ever been. And we never, ever even thought about coronavirus at all when we were doing this budget. And so that's what I meant in the last segment when I said we have to look back at where we are. And there's no doubt in my mind that we're going to have to move some funds into compensatory services. There's no doubt.
And for general ed as well, are we going to consider that also to see, you know, even some of our gen ed students might have some struggles?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Remedial services. If the state decides to keep the Regents exams, for example, which we hope that they don't, but if in case they do, we would have to find ways to remediate, to help students to get to perform at their very best. So the reviewing for the end of the year, that would be, but not only that, the gaps, the regressions that children will make having been away from instruction with their teachers. You know, we're trying our best. I think our plan will try to address it as best as possible, but we cannot come 100% to where that daily experience of that we get in POB. There's no way. And so there's some regression that will take place. So we're probably going to begin next year a little behind where we would have been had we completed the year in our own wonderful way here.
And I just want to, I mean, that's not probably not just us, right?
It's everywhere. It's everywhere. But you know, nobody gets to do second grade over. You know, and that's the thing. Everyone, my wonderful students who are probably listening in, who are the juniors who are, by the way, sending us notes. This is their junior year. This is their junior prom that they're missing. This is their graduation that they may not have. This is their play, the Newsies. They're missing out on experiences. They're missing out on academic experiences. We've got to find a way to fill that gap.
Any other Ginger?
Yeah, Lorna, when you were just talking about services, our children have IEPs for 11 months.
10 months.
10 months. And then what happens to that summer program?
We will have to speak about that. And I fully anticipate having to deliver some services during the summer.
And also for children who have pullout services, would there be a way that we would be able, maybe over the summer, if they're not away at camp, because who even knows if there's going to be a summer camp, to be able to help them because of that regression? That's what we're looking at. We're looking at, we actually are having to keep really good documentation on what we're delivering now. To determine, and we have to look at I think we have over 700 students. Yeah. We have to look at each one individually. Every child with an IEP has to be looked at individually to determine whether we have sufficiently covered that gap. And also, we talked about mental health, especially for elementary children. This year, we had a lot of conversations about it. If we have to, couldn't we?
Ginger, we
lost you, Ginger. We lost your volume.
We're not hearing you.
I'm sorry, Ginger, we did not hear anything that you just said after you said the summer. They were such pearls of wisdom. No, they weren't. Hear them again. Okay, the only thing I said is we did talk about mental health conditions for our elementary children, and we did talk about focusing some on it. We're going to have a lot of kids coming into school with trepidations. They've missed things. They haven't seen their teachers. They haven't seen their friends. If need be,
could we just get extra help in just for the beginning to walk our kids through if we don't have enough to think about it?
I'm sure they'll be planning for the opening of school. That will be very different. That will help to connect to last year.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Lauren?
Yep. So not to beat the horse, I feel the same exact way as my fellow board members that had just talked about IEP services. But I just want to reiterate that we did just instill a new program in our district as well, IEP programs, which are fantastic. And we had heard from our teachers that they feel already prior to this crisis that they are seeing that the AIS services has grown. So I know we're going to have, Vince, you had said that you were going to have an annual review. So in addition to hearing what our teachers had said prior to this crisis, and then also now that we are in crisis, and then we are going to have the regression, I just wanted to reiterate the need for AIS service, reading, extra reading teachers that are equipped in these services and new services that we are now going to be able to provide, just that we don't lose a beat.
Yeah.
Because now
The annual reviews I was referring to were the special ed annual reviews going on. So those are Dolores's office, but Eileen and Nino and the rest of the team have been looking at the AIS and reading services with Mary and I throughout this process, and we'll continue to do that to make sure that we're staffed enough to handle everything we need.
Okay, great.
Into consideration what comes next when we come back into session.
Okay, fantastic.
I had a couple of, Susan. Oh, that's Tara. Tara?
And thanks. Just to reiterate, so you're looking at special ed, AIS, and then the general ed population also in terms of where they might be coming back as well at all the populations.
Yep, that's what Lorna was just talking about. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I had a couple of questions. I know we will be monitoring the kindergarten numbers. I'm particularly concerned with JJP in Pasadena. You knew I would say that, Lorna. I see you smiling.
Of course.
So I just want to make sure we really keep our eye on that number. I know it falls within our guidelines, but it's at the high end of our guidelines.
We're keeping an eye on that. We take weekly reports from the census once we get online registration up and running, and we have everything in that we know of right now. So we have clear numbers of what we know of. It's what we don't know of it going forward. And this new norm sits in as to where we're going to have those numbers and when we get them. So.
And this just gives me an opportunity to speak to the community about kindergarten registration. We have loaded all the information that we've received thus far, and packets will be coming out in the next week or so. The principals will be putting that together for those who have already registered. We are going to an online for new entrants. We are hoping to put that in within the next 2 weeks, to put an online registration within this environment. We have to think of something, a way to do it differently. So I think give us 2 weeks to actually put this in place and to move to an online process for not only kindergarten, but for all new entrants, because it's a new world and we have to think differently. So our kindergarten numbers, I would just ask everyone, if you have kindergartners at home, we need them to register, and so that we can be accurate in our numbers. Right now we're working on projections. And you remember, if you go back to JJP's number, we projected 70, and to this day still only have 58 in JJP. So we don't want to give away staffing at this point. We have to be very conservative in our staffing, but we always honor our guidelines.
Great. I know that you can't give us this information prior to annual reviews, but once we have our annual reviews, will we get the ICT numbers by class? That was a yes, I'm guessing. Okay.
We've increased our
Also,
ICT
Well-
sections now. We have, if you notice, OBEC page now has an ICT
did
class
notice.
every grade level.
mhm,
That's a lot of staffing. That's a lot of
it
staffing.
is, but I'd still like to know the number
Sure.
of students
We still have a
in
guideline
each
for it.
class.
Right, we do have a
Yes.
guideline for that.
Also, in the past, we've received a spreadsheet where we can see how many staff members in each building by position. You know, so like on the listing where special ed staffing is, we have 12 psychologists. I'd like to know where those 12 psychologists are. I'd like to know where the reading specialists are, etc. So can we get that spreadsheet again? Okay.
Yes,
Lauren's-
I think we
So-
may have presented it before, but we certainly.
We did, so it is digital. We'll resurface it and get it over to you.
Well, I know you sent something home a couple of weeks ago, but that was not in the format. I
Okay.
mean, I'm happy that it's digital, but it was not in the format that I could really see each building, how many psychologists or social workers or
Okay.
reading people.
Yep.
Okay.
We have that,
Yeah, we
we
got that
have
to
it
you.
on the packet this week.
Okay, and then finally, I just want to reiterate what Tara and Ginger and Lauren said. I think we're going to need to continue to discuss what our kids are going to need academically, emotionally, when school begins again, and then into the next year. So I hope we will just continue those discussions as we move forward. Those were my questions. Okay, well, thank you very much, Vince.
You're welcome.
And for the financial explanations. And then we're going to move into public participation. We're obviously going to dispense with our regular public participation and ask Dr. Lewis to address some questions and concerns that have been emailed to the district, ask the superintendent, and to address them where you can.
So I know some people listening are going to be very disappointed, but I am not mentioning names because there's no way that I can confirm who it is. But there are a number of parents, a number of people who are representing their displeasure with the online learning for various reasons and some really legitimate reasons that they're bringing forth that we will be using to make a much better plan for the future. So some of the issues that they brought up, the equity across teachers, that not every teacher is providing the kind of FaceTime, the videos, the Zoom, the kind of experience that they're looking for. Basically, parents are looking for us to mimic the school day. In other words, at the secondary level, they're looking for 7 periods of instruction. Some are looking for 9 periods of instruction all day. I mean, we don't think that that's wise in terms of having children sitting at a computer from 7 to 3, but what the plan that we'll be putting forth will definitely address direct instruction from each teacher over the course of the week. So you will definitely see that addressed. They also are looking for accountability in terms of the kinds of materials that are being given and making sure that it's equitable across courses. They're looking for grade, how will we impact the grade? And I think by your giving us the permission to delay doing the board policy right now. I always have that. I don't know why I have a block on that word. Suspend the grading policy to come up with something that will serve children. I can guarantee you that we will be doing that. They're looking for more face time with the teachers, particularly at the elementary level. They're saying that the children want to connect with their teachers. And I think that you will see that. There's some questions about IEP and making sure that the IEPs are being delivered. And I know Dolores is, Ms. Espinoza is really looking at that. So we will be, I think, addressing that. Some folks are saying, be sure that when we do revise the graded policy, that the children who are doing well in honors classes are not affected. And I've already said before that we will guarantee that that will not happen. We have the student government representative to the board, Christian. I can mention him because that's his role. And as a representative to the board, Christian Lamantia is asking for a meeting with the school board on a Zoom. So perhaps the board will opine on that for them. We have a junior who is interested in knowing about the junior prom. And I actually responded to her that if it's before May 30th, it will not happen, but we'll try to make it up for them for next year. We'll probably do something in early fall for the juniors. Somebody who's asking about kindergarten registration, and I've responded to them. There were questions about the drug and alcohol. I think I tried to address it in my conversation. And I'm trying to think of, one person asked about the legal bills. Why is it that we have 400K in that line? And that person had the perception that we had attorneys on our, as that we have attorneys that we have in our staffing. And I explained to them that, no, we don't have an attorney in our staffing. We do pay for legal services. And those legal services cover a whole spectrum of issues, lawsuits, representations, negotiations. There's bond counsel. That line covers a lot of legal assistance. That her perception is incorrect. But again, more contact time, 1-8 with students. And one person asked about the Regents topics. I had suggested that the Board of Regents follow the AP. This person said, well, their teachers are not consistent in the topics that they cover, so that might be a problem. I think we could address that in the way we, if the Board of Regents were to come out with March 18th as a date, I think we would have enough time to address that. I think that covers almost all the topics. Lots of questions about the online learning plan, which I think will be addressed on Tuesday afternoon. We are hoping to put something out to the public after 3 p.m. tomorrow. Between 3 and 5, we'll put something out tomorrow. Thank you.
Sorry, I was on silent. Can I get a motion for routine business? Ginger, second. Tara, any hold separations or discussion?
I'm here. I just can't video myself. I don't know why. So I'm raising my hand, Lauren.
Okay, thank you, Lauren. All those in favor of routine business, please raise your hand. I don't know why I am. Okay, that it was unanimous. We're going to go to unfinished business, new business, I'm sorry. 11.1 resolution on
I'm sorry,
special.
can I try to help Mrs. Saxton? If you would look
Absolutely.
at the stop video, you might have hit that stop video button. If you could look at the bottom.
Yeah, no, I didn't actually.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I know.
Then if you could put something in the chat, if you're voting, it's just important that we see some evidence that you're voting.
You got it, no problem.
Okay, 11.1 resolution on special election, April 6, 2020. A motion, Seth, a second. Susan. Any discussion? All those in favor? Lauren, you voting yes?
Yes, I typed it.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I get a motion on 11.2 legal notice cancellation? Ginger, second. Seth, discussion? All
Lauren
those
is
in
voting yes.
favor? Okay.
Weird.
11.5, a resolution on the scope agreement for childcare. A motion. Susan, second. Seth, all those in favor? Lauren voted yes. A resolution on suspending the grading policy, 11.6. Motion, Ginger, second. Seth, any discussion? All those in favor? And then 11.7, can I have a motion on the resolution of the POB Central School District delegating to the president of the Board of Education the power to authorize the issuance of the anticipation notes, tax anticipation notes. Motion Seth, second Ginger, all those in favor? Lauren, yes. Lauren, yes. Okay. May I have a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of discussing collective bargaining negotiations and to obtain advice from district counsel? Seth, second. Tara, all those in favor? I'd like to thank everyone for attending our meeting and for caring so much about our school district. Please stay safe and healthy. Thanks so much. Good night.
Good night.